My name is Stephen Dunn. I'm the author and creator of Hellenistic Christendom, and I'm making a series of videos in different subjects that I'm passionate about in philosophy, theology, science, cinema, art, atheism, and occasionally into pornography as well, which has been my recent interest lately and has brought me and you to this video, which is my second interview with Vic Cipolla, who is really a friend to me now, but is more otherwise known as the husband of adult film star Danny Daniels. And he's also the author of the book Wait for the Corn, Lessons Learned from Being Married to a Porn Star. But what brought me and Vic together was to discuss a little bit more in detail about the nature of conservatism, because after all, he is fiscally conservative, a registered Republican, pro-life, and I happen to be those things as well. I went into this conversation with a million things to ask and a million things to say, because usually in my interviews, I'll type up a series of questions to ask my interlocutor, but I didn't even do this with Vic. So I just knew that I would kind of say some things, we'd kind of go off the head there, and of course that's what happened. But even as I came into it with wanting to say a million things, there's a lot of things where I could have jumped on it, given his discussion of the family, his views about Aristotle, stuff like that. But of course I refrained, and now I've walked away with even a million more things to think and say about our conversation. So I'm sure and hope that the same effect would be had on you as the viewer, because this is a very thought-provoking conversation, or at least I think it is. I just want to see what possible grounds of agreement could exist between a Christian philosophers, myself, and someone who's in his position, being married to an adult film star, and what that looks like from a conservative perspective. So I hope you're enriched and encouraged by this video. I hope this gives you a lot to think about, and that Christians wouldn't turn their eyes away from these kinds of subjects, but that they'd engage in them as much as possible, not only from a knowledgeable standpoint, because this requires a lot of discipline and study, but it also requires a lot of conviction as well, which entails that we're loving those that we're engaging with. And this doesn't necessarily mean extending a kind of naive niceness to them, but we love them in the sense that loving and knowing quite go hand in hand with one another. And our apologetic approaches, our evangelical approaches, should really reflect that attitude. So anyway, I just want to say thank you for making it to the video, and God bless.
So the first part of our interview, I remember I watched myself introduce. I was like, "Hi, my name is Stephen Dunn," and welcome. I just rushed that whole thing. And anyway, so definitely cringeworthy. But,
no biggie. Actually, I thought it looked good. I thought the interview was good. I mean, you getting some traction on it, some people watching it, or?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I've got more than triple, quadruple views than I've gotten on any of the videos. So what's interesting is that the second one is doing more popular, like our conversation about wine, Casablanca, and all that, which I thought was interesting. But
whatever.
Yeah, but yeah. So
I went, instead of wine, I went with scotch this time. Just to.
So I was going to ask what you were drinking.
It's called Dalwayne. You can't really find it in the States. I actually got it in Scotland, but
okay.
Recently Pope Francis was quoted as saying that whiskey's the real holy water. So I might argue with the Pope.
Is that a Highland Scotch, or is that a?
Yes, it's a Highland. I think it's a Speyside. It's used a lot in blends.
Okay.
But they do a bunch of their own singles. And when we were in Inverness, which is really up at the top of Scotland, the sommelier, they have a Scotch sommelier,
of course,
recommended this with dinner, and we fell in love with it and grabbed a couple of bottles. But it's not easy to find.
Yeah, no, awesome. I haven't had a whiskey in a good minute, so that sounds delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess just to kind of start, I don't know if you're kind of like me in this regard. So I like to read, and I kind of do this thing where it can happen in movies, it can happen in poems, a book, where I'll come across like an idea or a passage, and it'll just kind of hit me. And I do this thing where I'll put the book down and I'll just pace my room or my house, and I'll just be thinking about it until I flesh, I don't know, something out, I guess. And this happens in a lot of little ways throughout like my career in philosophy and all that. But I can think of maybe 4 or 5 big moments where it's always stuck with me and it's never probably going to leave me. Walt Whitman called it like having an immortal wound, and like education and stuff like that is just constantly your way of tending to that wound. So anyway, one of the last times was definitely from our conversation on Friday, that ever since we left that conversation, I can't get out of my mind just the nature of kind of the conversation we're having, only because, first of all, I didn't expect registered Republican, fiscally conservative, pro-life, and all that kind of stuff. And so now I'm curious, all right, there has to be some like more basic principles of how we view the state, how we view the person, enforcing public virtue and stuff like that, that's probably where we're going to disagree. And so long story short, my first question was, if you don't mind kind of being transparent, do you think that you're being married to an adult film star is something that needs to be like intellectually integrated into your view of the world? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. How to put this without being pedantic? No. The reason being is my marriage to her is because of who she is and what we are.
Okay.
The fact that she was in adult films. I've said this in other interviews and talked to other people about this. When people say things to me like, "Oh, do you have black friends?" No, I have friends. I don't categorize them by color, race, creed, job, whatnot. I judge people by who they are as a person. Now, you and I may not disagree. I like you, so I don't worry about your job title.
Right.
If you were doing something illegal, if you were pushing drugs, we would have a problem. But I don't know that it comes into my worldview. I think my worldview was fine when her and I met, because I didn't have a problem to begin with. So it wasn't like it was like, oh, now I have to come up with this new thought process. I'm pretty level in terms of where I've been since I turned about 18.
I see.
First time I ever voted was for Ronald Reagan. I was a student for Reagan. I've been a Republican. I came from a family of Democrats. I was a Republican from day one. I haven't changed in my conservative philosophy, but I've never been what they would call a conservative. In some places I am, in some places I'm not. I don't fit into a mold. I'm not a big believer in gang mentality. So
yeah. That makes sense. So I kind of what are your motivations then for kind of being a Republican? Like, what are your attitudes towards the world that you think supports? I mean, this doesn't have to be a political question, like, mind you. Like, this is probably just more attitudes towards the world. So, like, for example, go ahead.
And I think I know where you're coming from. I've always been a rugged individualist. I've always believed in that. I grew up and we've talked about this, grew up in a Sicilian family. It was, rub some dirt on your wound and get out there and do something and shut up. I don't want to hear your shit, stop whining. When I was a political consultant and this was shown, I think West Wing did a story about this and I laughed because it was actually true. It's like, when the country needs a dad, it gets a Republican president. And when it needs a mom, it has a Democrat president.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, but the old thought being like, your dad is like, cut this shit, get up, go out there and do something. I don't want to hear your crap. And mom's like, come here, let me give you a big hug. Don't worry about it. I'll make you a nice sandwich, And that's kind of, I was always the shut up, pull up your socks, go out there and do a job kind of a guy. And I'm also, I've always had a problem with free giveaways. A dollar not earned is a dollar spent unwisely, and I've seen that. I've seen that in many aspects of my life and in personal situations where I've noticed that things that are given to somebody and they're not earned are disrespected. And Jack Kemp was a friend of mine, actually a political mentor of mine, and he did that at HUD when he started realizing that if I allowed the people who live in projects to own pieces of the project, that it's theirs now, that they're going to take care of it better. And that's what actually wound up happening. The people who lived in the projects were able to buy into the projects, were able to own a piece of this. And now, you know what? When it's yours, you're going to take care of it a little bit better. So, a lot of my philosophies developed over that. The economic side of it. I was always, I believe the Reagan saying, well, actually, I think it might have even been Jefferson or Franklin, the government that governs least governs best. I do believe that government is necessary in certain, but I really do believe it needs to be limited when it gets to broad strokes and when it gets to be involved in assets of your life that doesn't necessarily require a government, but the government decides to interject themselves. That's when you start seeing just problem after problem and corruption and misuse of money and funds and projects not going in the directions that they're supposed to go in, and then it just deteriorates. So,
Yeah, I'm curious, how far does that kind of rugged, well, I guess to use just kind of your phrase back, that individualism kind of take you? Where do the limits come in, so to speak?
Obviously, I wouldn't want my rugged individualism to impede on anybody else's rugged individualism.
Okay, so probably some basic form of like a non-aggression principle, like not imposing yourself on others.
I guess, having studied in philosophy, but being more of a historian than anything else, I always laugh at these grand moral precepts. I mean, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill. Well, maybe not all the time. I mean, I guess fighting World War II and stopping Nazis was probably a good idea, even though killing was involved, So it's like, there are gray areas around the edges of everything, I believe. And I don't think you should just walk up to anybody who wronged you in the middle of the street and shoot them. There are necessities where violence has, stopped slavery, stopped Nazism, it's probably stopped communism. It's probably not necessarily the worst thing that it was used.
Would you agree that there are would you agree that there's basic human goods, for example?
Yeah, I think there are fundamentally good aspects to yourself and people. You should generally not, be shitty to human beings. They're like just general things that you should do. Take care of your family, try and be a decent person, try and be a good friend, try and be a good husband, and, do your best at a minimum.
Yeah. Now, my curious question now towards you, because I was reflecting a little bit more about the Friedman and Buckley debate, and I'm curious how you think the state, maybe not on a policy level, but how the state should enforce encouraging those public goods or those common goods.
My problem with the state encouraging problem goods, and my problem with Buckley, and I was always surprised that he went down this path. I was never a Buckley fan. I always thought he was a bit of an elitist personally.
Okay.
My problem is that the public good can be determined to be whatever a group of however many people are in that body politic decides it to be. And I'll give you a perfect example. I worked for a state senator years ago who, although the child seat law, putting children in child seats, seemed to be a very good idea, he felt it opened the pathway to a variety of other laws that have probably now led to you're not allowed outside unless you're wearing a mask. And that's the problem with once you give a toehold to a government in a specific area that they didn't have before, it doesn't stop. Social Security was designed originally to be a supplement so that when you grew old, you didn't grow poor and you had a supplement, not a pension, but a supplement. Now it's to the point where it's paying people on disability, paying wives of people, the government just said, hey, this worked and now we're just going to expand on it. Well, you went from child seat to laws about seat belts, to New York City passing a law about the size of soda cups, to now we can't go outside without wearing masks, to at what point do you stop we've gone beyond the public good and are now working our way towards totalitarian government telling you how to live your life on a daily basis? What is the difference between, children do belong in car seats and you're not allowed to have a 32-ounce soda because I think you're going to get fat and therefore I'm saying you're not allowed to have it. And that's a law that was passed in New York. Yeah, that's not even a joke.
I'm curious. So to what degree do you think, for example, the state should be involved with educating, like education?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think that there are certain standards that probably should be involved, but I was also a school choice fanatic. I mean, I do believe that parents should be given a choice as to where they send their kids to school. I think again, another perfect example, and this is where my philosophy has always gone, is schools are another example. When you are a monopoly, when all of your money has to go to that school, and when the school knows that it cannot go anywhere else, you're stuck, you're done. But if that school realizes they have to compete for students and they have to offer better education and they have to not be so top heavy and actually pay good teachers so they stay and educate their students, well, now it's a little bit of a different game. Now capitalism is taking its effect. But even, I mean, New York has this weird thing where we have Stuyvesant High School and Bronx High School of Science that you have to be tested to get into, but yet they're public schools. It's a charter schools. The whole thing's a joke. So yeah, you get involved in an educational system, and obviously I believe that states should. I don't think there should be a federal Department of Education. I think states should be running education because what's good for New York is not necessarily good for Arkansas. But
now, would you say that that's it's a poor judgment of standardizing how the state and the parents choose education?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it comes down to is special interest groups are really powerful, and the teachers union is never going to let that happen. So welcome to political realities that we have to face with. I mean, it's, you know, there's always some general universal norms when you're dealing in politics, and one of them is education tends not to be a voting issue. I don't know why, but it's not. You can go out there and offer the world's greatest education plans, and most people are going to yawn. It just doesn't get people to go to the voting booths.
Yeah, because the thing is, I noticed that same problem, and it's a lack of even the adults or the parents' education on their behalf to even understand like what kind of education they have in mind for their own kids. But
I would notice my dad taught in a school district on Long Island that you wouldn't consider to be a very good school district. It had its issues. It had some race problems and some other issues. My dad always got along really well there, and he was one of the favorite of his students. If you met my dad, you would understand it. But he also had a huge battle with parents. Huge battle. You know, calling home going, he didn't come to school with his homework done yet again, and the parents would say, what do you want me to do about it? If the parents aren't going to make the kids do homework, what's the teacher supposed to do at that point? You know, and there's a lot of people right now at home with 2 or 3 kids educating them. I bet you they think the value of teachers are a lot more than they were about 2 months ago.
Yeah. But it seems like Buckley's alternative to that would be to have maybe public authorities in some way enforce maybe incentives or what have you on those parents to become more civilized leaders in society. Because think about it this way. Children being educated aren't just confined to individual homes. They're also a part of larger communities, neighborhoods, and just a broader extent. So think of somebody who is a part of a community and they want to train their child that, just to bring this back into it, that they don't want their son to view explicit images or what have you. Now, my argument would seem that the public good comes frustrated when that child is in a community of other individuals who don't share that same public vision. And for example, they're kind of a little bit more haphazard about their children seeing these materials. And my son and that son are intermingling. I think Buckley is saying that we can at least try and enforce, maybe on a minimal level, to encourage states or public authorities to enforce a kind of liberal education, as it's called. So I wonder what you think of that alternative.
Do you really want the last crop of politicians that we've had deciding what your children should be learning? I mean, they can't even figure out what they know. That's the problem. The problem is that, well, it sounds great when the values that they're about to teach your child are what you believe in. But when the values now become, you know what, we think children deserve to see explicit material because we want them sexualized young, so that we believe that if we teach them these things, then maybe they won't rape and they'll use condoms and they whatnot. And now you as a parent go, whoa, I should have the decision as to when my child learns sex education, when my child learns death education, all of these other things that are taught in school except reading, writing, and arithmetic. And you're wondering now, who's raising your kid? Are the parents raising the kid, or is the school raising the kid? Hillary Clinton wrote the worst book on the face of the planet. It does not take a village to raise a child. Does not. It takes parents. It takes two good parents. And if the father or the mother is not part of that family, then mom or dad have to step up and work even harder. That's just the way it is. And the fact of the matter is that when you're sending kids to school and the school's responsible for feeding them breakfast, lunch, sometimes dinner, where they're doing their after school activities, where they're basically a babysitter, where they're learning societal norms from a school that may not be teaching them the correct societal norms.
Right.
You have bred a class of irresponsible parents, and you wonder why there are children out shooting up schools. That's the reality of it. When you tell a parent, don't worry about it, we'll do it, and you don't do it right, that kid is now a problem. And you've bred a class of, one of the reasons you laughed when you heard that I was pro-choice. Pro-life. One of the reasons why I am pro-life is I think it breeds irresponsibility. I'm not for irresponsibility. You're giving people easy way outs. You don't have to teach the kids sex education now. I know it's really uncomfortable, so don't worry about it. We're going to teach them in school with some ridiculous film and some teacher up there that they barely respect, with a bunch of kids in class all talking each other up because the guy said penis. I mean, it's a horrible idea. It's a horrible idea. And as much as it's funny that you talk about this, but it's like you're literally degrading family values by doing that, because now families don't have to exist. You don't need a nuclear family anymore. You got an extended school to do it. You have a village. The village may suck, but you have a village.
I anticipate that, but I think it's the other direction, because it seems like there's, at least in Friedman's mind, there's a distinction between either corruption existing within the state if it goes in the government direction, or there's corruption, which he thinks is in Buckley's view, if it's more on the individualist side. I think we can come across a synthesis view that the polis, as Aristotle's word for the city, which isn't so much a society, but it's individuals, a plurality of people. We're not talking a monolithic state here, for example, right? I'm not trying to say I want to dissolve individualism, but like I said, an instrumentalist view that could at least take in mind basic human public goods.
But then you have a potential to break down to mob mentality. It's one of the reasons why democracy in actuality doesn't really work, because you don't take into consideration what a true democracy. So I'll give you a rather comical but accurate depiction of it. There was, I think it was National Geographic had this incredible research boat that they spent an ungodly amount of money on, like $500 million. And they decided it would be fun to put it out there for a name. And people were going to vote on this name, and everybody was going to send in their name. Well, some wise ass decided to send in Bodie McBoatface. Guess what won? Bodie McBoatface won.
Did it really?
Yeah, because mob mentality took over, ridiculousness set in, people thought it was a comedy, and that's what happens. And it's one of the reasons why we live in a constitutional republic and not an actual democracy that most people don't understand. This isn't mob rule. And one of my bigger problems with both Plato and Aristotle is their idea that the family should subjugate to the state and the state has greater knowledge. It doesn't. It doesn't necessarily have greater knowledge. You're telling a group of elitists, you're saying that this group of elitists are going to know what's best for everyone without the consideration of others. And both Plato and Aristotle defended slavery on that basis. So I'm not a big fan of this, societal, hey, we're this big group up here and we'll tell you what to do. Don't work.
Yes. What if there's two options before us? Do you think it's necessarily like the solution to this problem is to, which may be Buckley's answer, which is to create incentives, compulsions, or stuff like that, or open up institutions to invite more liberty so that parents can become more involved, for example?
I mean, it would be great if we could open up more institutions that would incentivize people to do the right thing. But look, general human nature. If you tell somebody they're not supposed to do something, there's a good chance they're going to want to do that more than anything else. I mean, that is just inherent in everybody.
A la prohibition, yeah.
Yeah, a la prohibition, a la anything. I mean, to pick your goods, but prohibition's a great example of that. We're also, we are individualists at heart. I mean, we don't like cages even if they're gilded. That's been a tradition of human nature to Stone Ages. So, it's really interesting as to, I always thought that capitalism was one of the greatest forces of good in the world. And, obviously it's a bit Ayn Randian, but on the whole, capitalist countries do not go to war with each other, because why would you slaughter your marketplace? It doesn't make sense. There are certain things that capitalism has done. Like, for example, we had talked about this, the incandescent light, when people started realizing that the LED lights were saving them money and it didn't pay to have an incandescent light. No longer did it matter that it was environmentally sound. Now I can see some kind of a gain in this. And without being solipsistic, I am really the only person that I know about. So,
Yeah. No, interesting.